Yeah, so welcome back everyone. Welcome to the second half and welcome back to our online viewers as well. So my name is Akashamitra, for those of you that haven't met. And so I'm going to be doing the second half of the class. And we're going to be carrying on our series, which is on this book, Mind in Harmony by Subhuti. I've got a rather dog-eared copy here, but there are some nicer copies in the bookshop. So yeah, before I forget the first thing I want to say is this book is in the bookshop, and I'm going to be looking at chapter 2 of the book this evening and the ideas within it. And this is a series that we're doing for several weeks. So Kuslasara started us off last week. Who was here last week, just out of interest? Okay, about half of you. So it doesn't matter if you were here last week. Each week will be a kind of a drop-in standalone session, but we're doing this seminar for the next few weeks. And I really do recommend buying this book and reading it. We'll be outlining the key ideas from what's in it, but it's a really, really excellent book. So it's a kind of, how would you say it? It's a kind of a modern interpretation of a system called the Abhidharma, which comes from a school of Buddhism called the Yogacara. But none of that's really important. What's really important is that it's a really, really excellent manual telling you everything you need about how to work with your mind. So I recommend buying this and reading it. The second chapter that we're going to look at this evening is called Mind Watching. And in the chapter, Subhuti, who's the author, gets kind of straight to the point. So that's also what I'm going to do this evening, is get straight to the point. And he starts off the chapter with a quote from a text called the Dhammapada, which is probably the most widely read Buddhist text, how would you say, known to man. I don't know. It's very, 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 very popular, very, very well-read text. And these are sayings of the Buddha, basically. So it's the words of the Buddha himself, talking about various aspects of experience. And Subhuti starts off with a quote from the Dhammapada. And I haven't done this for a long time, actually, but I felt the need to get the old flip chart out this evening. So I don't know if all of you can see that. Can you see that? No? Okay. Oh, well, it's going really well so far, isn't it? Okay, well, I'll read it out anyway. It's not really for you. It's just I feel a bit more secure when I've got the flip chart there anyway. So, but I'll read this out. So it says, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox. Brackets, drawing the cart. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So let's just let that sink in for a moment. So you could really, it's maybe a little bit creative, but you could say that everything you need to know about Buddhism is in there, really. It's such a wonderful kind of succinct, just excellent teaching, I think. And we're going to spend the evening sort of unpacking this, really. And from this quote here, Subhuti kind of draws that out, and he explores three kind of central sort of ideas that come from that, and he calls these the three big ideas. Oh, I'm going to reveal. Can you all read? Is he going to do it? Okay. Done! Okay. So the three big ideas are that mind is the basis of all experience. That's the first big idea. Mind is the basis of all experience. So experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. So what does that mean? Really, it means that we experience everything through our minds, isn't it? Our lives are our minds, basically. We might think that our happiness, for example, is dependent on things that happen to us or external events. But what Subhuti is saying here, and what the quote from the Dhammapada is saying, is that it's our mind that makes up our experience, basically. We experience everything through our mind, so it's the state of our mind that will determine our experience. And the situation that we find ourselves in, and our lives and the things in it, are going to be primarily determined by our states of mind and what our states of mind are like, whether they're positive, whether they're negative, whether they're open, they're expansive, and the opposite, and so on. So far so good. And then the next big idea are that mental states are of two kinds. So I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. You can see I've got a little bit more tape here and a little flap that comes down. I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute, but you can maybe guess what that is if you look at the quote here closely, because it talks about acting with an impure mind and a pure mind. And then the third big idea is that happiness is the product of a pure mind. So the mind produces its own happiness, basically. As I said, it's not dependent on external events. It's not dependent on the things that we usually think of. The mind produces its own happiness. And actually in the text, Subhuti talks about this, and he says, when we purify the deepest levels of mind, we attain happiness completely and finally, closing forever the door that leads to suffering. So I really, really like this, because what it does is it gives us a real kind of vision for how far that can actually go. So I think this is really important to think about from the start. So when we say happiness, it's sort of tempting, isn't it, to think that it means something like, just feeling good, feeling positive, when you get up and you're in quite a good mood and you sit and you have a cup of tea and you look at the garden and the birds are singing and, whatever it is. And it does include that, what's being talked about here, but it also, the vision for that is as deep as we can possibly imagine it. So the Pali word, so this would have come down to us in an ancient English language called Pali, and the Pali word is sukha. And sukha includes ordinary happiness, but it also means something like bliss or incredible happiness beyond what you can imagine, basically. So if we look at the Buddha here, I think this is a really, really lovely image for just how far that happiness can go. So can we imagine a happiness that is so deep that it's way beyond what we can imagine now, which means you probably can't imagine it, but you know what I mean. And can we imagine a happiness that ultimately is not actually dependent on any external circumstances? So for the Buddha, no matter what circumstances he found himself in, he would just be completely happy. He would experience sukha, all the time. So there's no such thing as a bad hair day for the Buddha. He's experiencing expansive, positive mental states all the time. It doesn't matter what happens in his day, who turns up, whether he got a good night's sleep, all of those sorts of things. But for us, at our level, it does include an ordinary level of happiness as well. So what I also like as well about this is that in the chapter, Subhuti talks about this, and he says the three big ideas, so they're like fundamental concepts, really. He says that the three big ideas are ideas that can transform our lives. So it's not just about being a little bit happier. If we can really get a handle on this, and if we can really start to work with what he talks about, that will be transformational for our lives. So it will have a huge impact on our lives. And I think what he also means by that can transform our lives, he means that it's within our reach, and in a way it falls within our level of responsibility to actually create our own happiness. So we can do something about it. And he gives us a description and the sort of the technology to work with that, really. So let's just pause for a moment there. When I look at this, and when I look at these three big ideas, the thing that strikes me most is just how radical this is. When I remember the first time I read this quote from the Dhammapada, it's the first two verses of the Dhammapada, And I just thought, this is really, really radical, isn't it? And it's quite kind of countercultural, because this isn't how we usually think about happiness. This isn't how we usually think happiness arises. It's not usually, when we think about where happiness is to be found, we don't think about the mind and we don't think about mental states. Well, I do, but that's because I've been a Buddhist for a long time, you know. But sort of that's not how it appears in our culture, is it? Let me just ask all of you, do you sort of believe this in a sense? Do you believe that this is actually true? Do you believe that happiness comes from a pure mind? Yeah. You all do? Oh, right, you're no fun, are you? Okay. Because what I was going to say is I don't quite believe it, which is odd, isn't it? Because you all do, and I'm the one sat here doing the teaching. So it's a bit of an odd reversal of roles, isn't it? But I don't believe it fully, actually. And I don't think all of you actually believe it fully either. I think you probably believe it a little bit, but actually, if we believed it fully, I don't believe it fully. I think if I did, my life would look pretty different to what it does. Maybe not radically different, because you know I've been doing this for a long time. I've made a commitment. I've been ordained. My life is, I'm living a pretty full-time Buddhist life. But here let me put it another way, in the privacy of my own mind, sorry to disillusion you all folks, it's not, I don't get up every morning and I'm not sort of floating on a lotus and thinking, how can I deepen my mental states? There's a lot of kind of anxiety, there's a lot of craving, not a lot of anxiety, there's little bits of anxiety, there is craving throughout my day, and I don't quite fully believe it. But the great news is, you don't actually have to. And I don't think you actually have to fully believe this in order to practice it. And this is the wonderful thing about these ideas, and this is the wonderful thing about this text and what Subhuti lays out in the book, is that you don't actually have to fully believe it. By our nature, because we're unenlightened, we don't fully believe this at the moment. But what it calls for is an open mind and a level of receptivity. And the more we practice what I'm going to talk about this evening, then the more we actually do believe it, because we see the results. But I was thinking, okay, well, if I don't fully believe this, what do I believe, or what would our culture have us believe? And it depends where we get our cues from, doesn't it? So if we look to adverts, for example, I don't have a TV, but I do watch the odd thing, I really like watching First Dates. I don't know if anybody watches First Dates. I really like that. And I was watching a couple of episodes of that before Christmas, and it's wow, television just before Christmas is quite a thing, isn't it? It's buy this, do this. And the subtext is, that's what will make you happy. And that's what we all want, isn't it? We all want to be happy. If you ask most people, what do you want? And I don't know what they would say, perfect partner, or they want the perfect job or something like that. It's not actually that they want that. It's that they want that because they think it's going to make them happy. Because this is a sort of an inbuilt thing in us, isn't it? Is that we want, we know somehow that we're capable of more. We know that, I think, in a sense, that happiness is our kind of birthright, because we have that potential within us for it, but we go looking for it in the wrong places. So I thought I'd have some fun with this, and when I was thinking about putting this talk together, I thought, okay, well, where do you get information for that sort of thing? And one of my things is that I listen to a lot of music, so I often get earworms. So I noticed I had this earworm for a song called Happy Together. Does anybody remember that? No, I'm really old. The Turtles, anyway, early 70s. And I was thinking there's loads of pop songs about this, isn't there? Happy Together. I was thinking, You've Made Me So Very Happy, blah, 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 blah. And I thought I'd do a quick Google search and say, okay, well, let's take your average pop song and see what that has to say about happiness and where you find happiness. Sorry, I'm not just checking my emails, by the way. It's not the lyrics are here. So here we are. We've got an archetypal pop song here which tells us how to find happiness. So it says, here is what I need to say to you. You, yes, you. Yeah. You make me happy. So it's not mental states that make you happy. You make you happy. You make me happy. You, yes, you. Yeah. You make me happy, because nobody in this world can do what you do when you do what you do. Because you, yes, you make me happy, etc., etc., etc. And then there was another good bit which I thought was good. If you were an apple, then I would be the pie. And just so that I could stay close by, see what she did there? Your side. If you were a tree, then I would be the leaf, because hanging around with you would be all that I need. You, yes, you, yeah, you, yes, you make me very happy, because no one else can do what you do when you do, etc., etc. So that's the sort of classic kind of pop song advice, isn't it? So it's you that will, i.e. someone else, that will make you happy. And I think we all have versions of this, don't we? So for me, it's not finding a perfect partner that's not something that I tend to latch onto. I actually already have quite a nice partner, and I think that's not a joke. Anyway, and I think it's partly, joking aside, I think it's partly because I don't expect her to make me happy, that actually that works fairly well. But with me, it's an easy life. So that's what I think is going to make me happy, is I want an easy life. And it's interesting to ask all of yourselves what you think. So we'll always have things that we come back to in our mind. If only this, then that would make me happy. If my life was like this, then that would make me happy. So for me, it's that I want an easy life. That's the main thing that I keep coming back to, is if only I had an easier life. I've actually got a really lovely life. But if it was a bit easier, then I would be happy. Despite the evidence, I think. Because when I actually look at the evidence, it's not an easy life that makes me happy. So I want an easy life, and then when I have an easy life, it doesn't actually make me happy. What makes me happy, I tend to find, obviously is a still mind, and the mental states that come from having a still mind, but they tend to arise, those positive mental states tend to arise for me through challenge and not actually having an easy life. It's actually the opposite. So I really noticed this on recently, where I was on the winter retreat that some others of you were on at Vajrasana, and I'm going to let you into a terrible dark secret here. I didn't really want to go on that retreat. I did actually want to go on it. The main part of me wanted to go on that retreat, but I always get a thing before I go on retreat that I don't really want to go on retreat. I think, I've got a full-time job, and it's, it's quite complex, and and it's coming up to Christmas. Actually, I just want to rest and to watch films. But the majority part of me knows that it's a really good idea to go on retreat. I went on retreat, and it was fantastic, and I enjoyed very, very positive mental states. And it's very, very similar with a lot of things. I usually don't want to teach here as well. That's another thing. Sorry to disappoint you all. I don't generally want to do it before I do it, and I have this thing that I go through. I was talking to Richie here earlier about it. It's like I'm preparing for a few days in advance, and I think, why is it like it's voluntary? Why on earth do I volunteer to do this? I've got to do all this preparation when actually I'd rather just be having free time and da-da-da-da-da. And then actually I start to enjoy it, and then when I'm here, I actually love trying to communicate the Dharma. The big part of me actually really, really, really does love that. But there's a little part of me that is like, why am I doing this? I don't enjoy it, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, I do it, and it's fine. So those honest admissions are a way of me saying we often don't know what makes us happy, do we? And really, what this text is saying is you don't need to believe all of this. You actually just need an open mind, and you need to test it out in your own experience. So you need to put these teachings into practice, and then you need to see what happens, basically. And according to the Buddha, and obviously I deeply trust the experience of the Buddha, what we need to do is we need to purify our mind. So if experiences are, if a pure mind leads to happiness, then we need to purify our mind. So Subhuti asked the question, how do we do that? Well, we need a method, basically. So we need a method, and that method is to nurture pure mental states and to let go of impure mental states. And in order to do that, we need to discriminate, basically. So a little bit like Dharma Night was saying in the first half of the class, we need to learn to recognize our mental states, and we need to learn to discriminate and to notice the effects that those mental states are having on us. And as I was saying earlier, is sort of contained in the teaching here, mental states are of two kinds. So we've got what Subhuti calls, so we could say pure or impure mental states, but he uses the phrase wholesome and unwholesome, and I find that a little bit more helpful personally. And he's referring to the same thing, but I don't know. I mean, when somebody says pure or impure, well, what does that conjure up for you? Yes?
Before when you said, does everyone feel like you agree with this statement? It's hard to disagree with a room full of people, so I just kept my mouth shut. But the word impure does make me feel, of course, while I agree in many ways what you're trying to say, the word impure just makes me feel uncomfortable, because it just implies basically you can't think of bad things. And
yes.
As far as I'm aware, I just thought it's the way you engage with those thoughts that kind of determines your state. That's why I'm glad you changed the words a little bit there.
Yeah, that's right. So pure and impure, it's what that makes me think of is something like, I don't know, pure in the sense of being virginal or something like that, or completely untainted by negative mental states. And it doesn't mean that. So it can mean untainted by negative mental states in the sense that the more we work with our mind, the more positive mental states will predominate. But it doesn't mean sort of pure in that sense of the kind of like that, I don't know, like in the sense of being, being, sort of virginal or sort of religiously pure or something like that. It means basically ethically and spiritually pure. So in the sense of more positive mental states, in the sense of, well, it says here actually. So when it talks about wholesome mental states, it talks about renunciation or non-ill will or non-cruelty. And then on the left-hand side, we've got unwholesome, which is thoughts of sense desire, ill will, and cruelty. But even that needs a bit of unpacking, I think. Particularly this thing about sense desire. So he talks about craving for sense desire. So what that means is we want an experience through our senses. Whether that's food or sex or TV or whatever it is. But those things in themselves, they're not necessarily tremendously harmful. And this sort of gets into what you were talking about. It's perfectly natural for us to have those desires. That's the thing. So we don't need to necessarily cut off those desires, but we do need to look at our relationship with them, basically. So if we've got a neurotic desire for sense pleasure, and I think the key to that is whether we think that experience is going to provide something that is more than the experience is actually going to provide. Are we expecting that experience to be a kind of a stand-in a sense? Does that make sense for people? So, for example, do we expect a partner to be the answer to all our prayers? Do we expect that food is going to provide comfort to us or a sense of well-being that it can't possibly provide? are we watching TV because actually, there's a sort of an inner lack in us that needs to be looked at? Or are we just eating food because we're hungry? Are we, do we have realistic expectations of our relationships and so on? So it's about the relationship that we have with our desires that's the important thing, and increasingly having more and more of a sense of awareness around that. But I also think there's something to say around here on the right-hand side, where it talks about wholesome mental states, because that gets categorized as renunciation, non-ill will, and non-cruelty. But I don't think that's incredibly accurate. So Subhuti talks about this as not just an absence. So when we say renunciation, he talks about that also in terms of contentment. And even that, contentment is not contentment in the ordinary sense of the word. So it's not like contentment in the sense of like, I don't know, sitting next to the fire with your pipe and slippers or something like that. Oh, I'm quite content, dear, don't worry about me, It's not that kind of contentment. It's a very, very deep, very deep positive mental state that is extremely enjoyable, very, very, very pleasurable, and also means that we can just experience that craving less and less and less, because we're so content with the experience that we're having. So it's a deep, deep contentment, and non-ill will. Well, it'd be much better to think really of what Danny Utah was talking about in the first half of the class. So thinking about metta, of loving kindness, and all of the positive mental states that we associate with that. And non-cruelty, we could think of, very, very deep compassion, a motivation to help others rather than harm them, a deep, deep drive to do good in the world and to help others, and that doing that from a deep place of connection with others. So maybe I'll pause for a moment and just see if anybody's got any questions so far before I go on to the next bit. How's this all sounding so far? Is it making sense? Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah. Paul, yes.
To what degree can we exchange or combine mind with body in that context?
Yeah, well, I think the mind's not just an intellectual. It's like we experience that through the intellect, don't we? But it's very, very important to be in touch with our physical experience. I'm not sure about just exchanging it like one for one by saying like, if we speak and act with a pure body, for example. But it's in meditation, I think we learn this in meditation, don't we? It's very, very important to be in touch with our physical experience as well. So it's not just something that happens from the neck up. It's our sort of whole experience, and that obviously includes the body as well. But I'm sure it would be very possible to have the kind of mental states that we're talking about and to work on our mind if, for example, you were paralyzed from the neck down. But obviously a bodily experience helps us to come into to sort of work with our mental states, and I think that sense of tranquility in the body helps to aid those mental states arising as well. Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, so one thing I think that's good to say about this, and I think you probably worked this out for yourselves by now, but this is a very, very pragmatic teaching. And this book is extremely pragmatic. And what the Buddha is saying is that, the Buddha, one of the things that the Buddha said was, he said that I'm interested in suffering and the end of suffering. And you have this here in this quote, don't you? So the Buddha's not concerned with complicated philosophy or sort of, very, very overly abstract teaching. What he wants is for us to end our suffering, and he wants to tell us how to do that. And I think the context of this is very, very important. So this thing about unwholesome and wholesome mental states, this comes from a teaching. It comes from a teaching of the Buddha, and it's a sutta called The Discourse on Two Kinds of Thought, and I'll read you something from that. So the Buddha says, "It occurred to me, suppose that I divide my thoughts into two classes. Then I set on one side thoughts of sense desire, thoughts of ill will, and thoughts of cruelty. And I set on the other side thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of non-ill will, and thoughts of non-cruelty." So the context for that, this thing about mental states being of two kinds, is really, really important, I think. The Buddha's referring to his own quest before he had this experience of enlightenment. So before the Buddha gained enlightenment, he was talking about, or he's talking retrospectively from the point of view of his enlightenment, about how he arrived there, basically. And he's talking about passing his thoughts into two kinds. And I think that's really, really important. So he's not talking from the perspective of somebody who is like a sort of like a God figure that is in judgment. You know, going back to what you were saying before, it's not about us sort of, you know, being creatures who are like sinners and we need to be more and more pure. It's not about that at all. And there's no God that is going to punish you if you have an impure thought, for example. It's nothing to do with that. It's just noticing that certain kinds of thought lead to happiness and certain kinds of thought lead to unhappiness. And that's completely natural. And, you know, so it's not also a divine process. It's just how the universe works. Our mind being part of the universe, it's just how it is. It's just what happens, basically. And I think you have that here with the line where it says, even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox drawing the cart. You know, for us, that's a bit odd, isn't it? You know, it's a bit of an odd analogy. Obviously, because you don't see many people drawing, ox carts down Bethnal Green Road. But it would be something like, for us, just saying something like, as sure as night follows day, or as sure as eggs is eggs. You know, it's basically like that is just going to happen because that's the way it is. So when we know that that's a natural process, then we can bring a certain kind of awareness to that and see if that process is actually true. And that's the key, is we need to see it for ourselves. So there's a lovely line, I don't know if some of you will be familiar with some verses called the Tiratna Vandana, which we chant on retreat in the mornings. And one of the lines that I've always loved from that is the English is, it says, "Come see for yourself." And the word in Pali is ehipassiko. Ehipassiko, it means come see for yourself. And I think that's what's being got at here, is you need to see for yourself whether when you engage in this process of mind watching and you encourage positive wholesome mental states and you let go of unwholesome mental states, well, what happens? See for yourself. Do you feel lighter? Do you feel clearer? Do you feel more expansive? Do you feel happy? And is the opposite true? You know, when you, as Dana Uttar was saying, when you rehearse that argument with a friend, when you get into righteous indignation and you start complaining in your mind about something, well, what's the effect on that? What's the effect on your body? What's the effect on your mind? So that's what the Buddha did, was he noticed this and he worked with this, and ultimately the result was that he became free of all craving, free of all suffering, and dwelt in these endless positive mental states. I had a little bit of an experience of this myself on Saturday. So Saturday morning, I was at home on my own in my flat, and I thought I'd do some cleaning. So I was cleaning the flat on Saturday, and normally what I do when I clean the flat is there's a particular podcast that I'm a bit obsessed with at the moment, which is called Chart Music, where it's a load of middle-aged music critics dissect every episode of Top of the Pops since like 1976 or something. It's fantastic. It's so good. Like, for a complete like pop music geek, you know, they spend like 20 minutes talking about each song, you know, and I really, really like it. No spiritual value in it whatsoever, but very, very good. So usually what I do is I clean the flat, put that on my headphones, and it just makes cleaning very enjoyable. I listen to an episode of that. But I thought, no, actually, I won't do that. I'll do something different. I won't have any kind of, I won't put any music on. I won't listen to a podcast or anything. I'll just observe my mental states and see what happens. And so I did that, and I was like, you know, I was hoovering and I was sweeping the floor and so on. And this thought came up in my mind. I can't remember why, but I was thinking about the place where I work, and I was thinking about the people that I work with, and I've mentioned this before. Some of you will know that I work for a charity called Karuna, and we fund organisations that work with very poor, very marginalised communities in India, Bangladesh, and Nepal, and things are not easy at work at the moment. Things are quite challenging and quite complex because the situation in India, I won't go into why, but there's lots of very difficult, challenging things happening in India at the moment. And my mind came onto this, and I was thinking, God, I really appreciate how my manager has been with all of this at the moment. So I'm managed by a very, very lovely man who's a friend of mine. And I just thought, he's dealing with all of these stresses and strains so well. He's very, very kind to us. He's an absolute dream to work with. And I thought, do you know what I'm going to do? When we have a team meeting on Wednesday, I'm going to rejoice in him and say how much I've appreciated him. So this was what my mind was doing. And then I thought, yeah, but then this other person that I work with is really, really lovely as well, who's also in my team. And eventually what my mind started doing was I was rejoicing in every single person that I was working with. And I thought, actually, it'd be really lovely to say something about each member of my team. There's sort of 5 or 6 of us. And so I was going through each member of the team in my mind, thinking about what I appreciate about them and how, you know, why it's really nice to work with them and so on. And by the time I'd hoovered the whole flat, I was feeling like really, really positive and open and expansive. And I thought, this is what's being talked about here, is almost without thinking about it. This is exactly what I'd done, was encourage these positive mental states and just see what the effect is. And the effect was really, really lovely. I felt it kind of buoyed up. It was very, very enjoyable. And so that's just an example really from my own life. So in the case of craving and ill will and sense desire, what the Buddha saw was that dwelling in these kind of unwholesome mental states produces suffering. And Subhuti talks about this in the book, and he says that it's important to think about this in 2 ways. So it produces suffering in 2 ways. Firstly, because dwelling in those mental states will lead to will kind of lead us to taking certain actions. So we might also speak from that negative mental state, and that will have consequences. Basically, that will have real world consequences. But it's also unpleasant in and of itself as well. So from a Buddhist perspective, a thought is actually an action. So we'll be talking about this probably a lot over the next few weeks. But just because something happens in the privacy of your own mind, it doesn't mean that it's not an action. So in Buddhism, we talk about actions of body, speech, and mind. So your thoughts are actually an action, and they will have consequences for ourselves and for others. But obviously, they might lead to actions of speech and body as well. But also, negative mental states are unpleasant in themselves as well. And he says that it's really important to notice that, basically. So we tend not to be very good at noticing that, partly because we tend to underplay it. If we experience a negative mental state, we tend to get into justifying it. and we tend not to actually see the negative effect on ourselves. But I thought it was interesting in the first half that Danny Utah was talking about this, so we can notice the effect that it actually has on us. I think one of the things with this is, like, particularly around craving, is while there's a chance that that craving will be fulfilled, we tend not to notice the unpleasant aspect of it. So if we're, for example, craving, I don't know, a thing or even a person, then, you know, we might think, we might not think about the fact that it's actually an unpleasant mental state. But if we really, really look at that, I was thinking about this in relation to being in love, for example. I don't know what you think about that, but I've actually in the past found it quite an unpleasant mental state. It's like you really, really, particularly when it's unrequited love. I'm seeing a few people are sort of nodding. You know, we think of that. We really celebrate that, don't we? You know, oh, to be in love and da-da-da-da-da, you know. Like, there are aspects of that are pleasant, but there are aspects of it that are actually very, very unpleasant. Like, we really, really want this thing, and we either don't get it, or when we get it, it's not actually what we think it is. I could do in fact I have done more or less whole separate talks about that, but I won't go into that too much now. But that intense craving is actually quite unpleasant. It's the absence of something that we really, really want. And what we tend to latch onto is the anticipation of it being fulfilled, which doesn't actually fulfill its original promise anyway. But then what happens is we tend to discount the sort of negative feelings that are associated with that. But if we're really honest with ourselves, and actually if we're really, really mindful around that, then I think we actually notice that you know, there are actually very, very unpleasant aspects to that. So another aspect of mind watching is there's another thing actually that I want to say about that as well. So there are consequences, and the negative mental state is unpleasant in and of itself. And the other aspect is that it sort of blocks a deeper understanding in a sense. So while we're in a state of craving, these two things sort of mutually, there's a relationship between these things, between the unwholesome mental states and the wholesome mental states. And while we're in an unwholesome mental state, we can't be experiencing a positive mental state at the same time. So that, say whatever it is, craving or whatever, actually blocks us from experiencing its positive counterpart. So it's like a block to wisdom and a block to a deeper understanding. This made me think of, there's a poem by a guy that he's dead now, he's been dead a long time, but I'm not really into poetry, but there's a poet that I used to really like. He also used to make records as well, a guy called Ivor Cutler. Has anyone heard of Ivor Cutler? Probably for anyone who's over 50 probably, but okay, so a few of us. I really, really like Ivor Cutler. Very, very kind of eccentric, sort of slightly odd kind of Scottish poet. And those of you that have heard of Ivor Cutler, have you heard of the poem or the song I'm Happy? Have you heard of that one? So it's a poem and it goes, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, and I'll punch the man who says I'm not. I just think it's great. And then it goes on again, like, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, and I'll punch the man who says I'm not. I'm happy, punch. I'm happy, punch. And then the last line is, I'm happy, ugh. So it's funny, isn't it? Because you can't be happy and wanting to punch someone at the same time. It's just not possible. You know, when you feel happy, you know, you love people, don't you? You feel kindly to people. You know, you'll have had experience of this. When you get up, you're in a good mood, you're in a very, very positive mood. You're walking down the street, you feel generous, don't you? You want to, if you see someone, if there's like a homeless person outside the supermarket, you want to give them some money. You want to chat to the person in the shop, all of these sorts of things. You know, you don't feel happy and want to punch the first person you see. So when we're experiencing those negative mental states, it also blocks positive mental states from arising. So we need to prevent those, and then we need to remove those negative mental states. And the way that we do that really is just by not giving them energy. So often we need to be aware of what's actually happening. It's not just a case of sort of blocking something out. We need to notice what's going on and experience what's going on, but we don't, for example, follow that thought. You don't give it energy by sort of following it through. So, for example, in the first half we were sat in meditation, and Dharma was giving the example of sitting there, noticing that you've got into a conversation with a friend where you're ticking them off, where you're rehearsing an argument or something like that. You don't need to follow that through. You don't need to let it roll on, basically. You can just let that go and come back to the body and come back to the breath or whatever it is, the object of meditation. And that's a training. So that's what we're doing in meditation, basically, is training ourselves for when we're outside of meditation. And because it's very, very difficult. Ideally what you want to get into is a state where you can notice your mental states outside of meditation as often as possible, like all throughout the day. But if you're not developing that awareness in meditation, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to be able to do that. Okay, how are we doing for time? So Subhuti talks about another aspect of mind watching being the active cultivation of mental states which bring happiness and what he calls true security, which I think is a lovely phrase, because often what we think is going to bring us security is actually not. So what he's saying here is the real security is to develop a mind that is not dependent on external objects for security. So often what we think is, if I get, the house or the car or the well-paid job or something like that, that's going to be security. But all of those things are actually very, very flimsy, and they're not going to bring you the happiness that you seek. But by using this phrase, true security, I think that's lovely, because what he's talking about there is a happiness that is in the direction of the happiness of the Buddha, which, as I was saying before, is not dependent on those external objects. Okay, so the next thing that he talks about is he talks about force of habit, basically. So really just the idea that whatever we dwell on becomes the inclination of our mind. And he illustrates this. He uses a lovely simile. Because what we're looking at really is like, how do we do this? How do we start to pay attention? How do we start to notice our mental states? And I think when we come across all of this, we can have ideas about, these sort of sudden, very, very unwholesome states of mind that we have, or, the big things in our lives. And what he alludes to here is that actually, most of the time, it's small mental habits that we have. It's the things that we repeatedly do with our mind throughout the course of the day in, day out, week in, week out. And the effect that has is to create sort of pathways in our mind. It creates a sort of rivulet in our mind. Well, the image that he uses, I'll read this to you because it's very lovely. He says, it's like rain running off a hillside. The water finds the line of least resistance. Perhaps a slight concavity in the ground flows into it and then progressively deepens into a gully. I've often observed this in India when the rainy season begins. In the morning, a small trickle of water might be flowing over a footpath. When I pass back that way a few hours later, a small stream is traversing the path and has started to wash away its surface. The next day, the stream is wider and deeper and has dug a trench for itself. After a few days, I have to cross by wading up to my knees in the torrent. In the same way, our thoughts cut trenches and reshape the topography of our mind. The deeper a channel is, the more swiftly and vigorously thoughts will rush down that route in future. So that's beautiful, isn't it, I think? The way he talks about our thoughts cutting trenches and reshaping the topography of our mind. So the more we dwell on something, the more our mind will tend towards that in the future. And happily for us, the reverse is true as well. So with negative mental states, the more we dwell on positive mental states, the more we will tend towards positive mental states, and vice versa. Just that analogy made me think of when I was a teenager. I grew up in a place called Berwick-upon-Tweed in the north of England, in Northumberland, and so that's the name's in the place, Berwick-upon-Tweed. So it's on the Tweed River, and the Tweed is a very, very mighty river. Like, it's huge. So the town that I lived in is right where it meets the sea. And it's a massive long river, and it's very, very deep, and you definitely wouldn't want to swim in it. You'd be in an extreme amount of danger. But we did used to go swimming some way up, like sort of 20 miles back, basically. And you can swim in that area because it's it's not quite as deep, it's not quite as ferocious. And then if you go up about 40 miles away to the Lowther Hills, that's where the source of it is. And it's a bit like Subhuti was saying. It's basically the more you get closer to the source, like the deeper and the more powerful that is, basically. But whatever stage we're at, we can work with that. So if we shape our mind, we shape our future. And this is the real meaning of karma. So this is what he says, basically, is this is the real meaning of karma. Karma is the process whereby we shape ourselves and we shape our future through our mental states. And as I said, most of our actions that affect our mind are these kind of small, repetitive, habitual tendencies of our mind. So I'm going to start to wrap up in a minute, but before I do that, there are 4 more just little concepts to bring in, basically, the final ones of this chapter. Because Subhuti makes the point that it's not easy to put all of this into practice. It's not actually easy to watch our mind and to classify our mental states, because we don't actually always know what mental states of ours are skillful or unskillful. I think partly this is true because often in our culture we're encouraged to have certain negative mental states, and they're almost sold to us as being quite positive. So I'm thinking of things like righteous indignation, for example. Like, it's somehow seen as really, really positive to get very, very angry about something. Do you know, I mean, if you all experience that, like, you really get on your soapbox, don't you? I noticed this myself. A few years ago, I gave up drinking caffeine. And that was a pretty big thing for me because I really love coffee. But I gave up drinking caffeine. I only drink decaf now. And one of the triggers for that was my partner and I used to often spend Saturday mornings together, and we drink a lot of coffee. And I noticed that I would really get on my high horse about things. Like, we'd start talking about things, and we'd start talking about, I don't know, sometimes it would like we'd be talking about Buddhism and Buddhist teachings, and I could slowly feel myself like getting up, putting my foot in the stirrup, getting onto the saddle, and before I knew it, I was like right up there on my high horse, saying, well, it's like this, isn't it? And if people would only do this, and if we would only work with our minds and stuff like that. And obviously it's like completely ridiculous, isn't it? Because I'm getting into this sort of sense of indignation, which is a negative mental state. But that's encouraged in our culture as a positive mental state. Craving is encouraged as a very positive mental state in our culture. As I was saying before, it's like this thing of really wanting something, really craving something, that's encouraged partly because it makes money for lots of businesses and it fuels the advertising industry, the more we're sort of wanting creatures. But from a Buddhist perspective, that's a negative mental state. So we often don't know what's negative and positive. So we need some help with that. And Subhuti gives us these 4 dyads. So dyad means like pairs of, I think it means pairs or something. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I think it means like pairs, not pairs of opposites, but pairs basically. So these 4 dyads are skillful or unskillful. So we can look at our mental states and we can see if they fall into these categories. And the first one is skillful or unskillful. And this is a phrase that some of you will have heard if you've been coming to the Buddhist Center for a while. And I think this is fantastic. It's such a great way to describe mental states, skillful or unskillful. Because what it means is, it's not to do with being sort of obedient or, sort of like a commandment or anything like that. It's basically, if it's a skillful mental state, there's a degree of skill to it. Like, we're taking responsibility and we're working with our mental states almost like as if it's an art form. We're paying attention to our mental states and we're developing them the way a sort of a craftsman would, or a very, very skilled person would, which I think is fantastic. So is there that awareness? Are we working the way a skilled craftsman would? And then he talks about them being praiseworthy or blameworthy. So this isn't about approval. It's not about obedience, but it's about calling on people that we look up to. So people perhaps that we know that have been practicing Buddhism for longer than we have, that we look up to, would they think that these mental states are praiseworthy or blameworthy? And again, that's not about sort of judgment or anything like that. It's just about them wanting the best for us, basically. Is the mental state high or low? So this is sort of recognizing that our mental states, the potential there is infinite, basically. So we could have positive mental states all the way up to the Buddha and beyond, or, are they low in the sense of, not the kind of mental states that we want to have. And he talks about this sort of being like an adventure, basically, like the spiritual life, working with our mind being an adventure. And then the last one is he talks about the mental state being light or dark. And the key to this is basically whether it's light or dark is whether it's coloured by awareness. So is there an awareness in that mental state? And the interesting thing about that is that it means that a mental state that we think of as negative can actually be positive if there's a degree of awareness around it. So he talks about that, for example, in terms of being darkly sad, which would mean that there'd be no awareness around it, but we could be lightly sad in the sense of we're feeling sadness, but there's a degree of awareness around that, and there's a pliancy there that we can, because we're aware of it, we can actually work with it. So it's a positive mental state if there's a degree of awareness around it. We might be frustrated, we might be a little bit angry, but if there's a degree of awareness around it, and there's a more positive direction that can go in, then that's a positive mental state. And if we bring that level of awareness, at the very, very least, even if that mental state is slow to change, if there's a degree of awareness around it, then that's positive. And the degree of the awareness around it will actually have a kind of an effect on it. I think it's almost like it shines a light on that mental state. And that's very, very different from that feeling of just being stuck, isn't it? Like as if you're in just a trench and you can't get out, basically. And that awareness, at the very least, checks the growth of that negative mental state. Okay, so I'll just quickly recap those 4 dyads for you. So is the thought skillful or unskillful, praiseworthy or blameworthy, high or low, or light or dark, which pertains to awareness? So, just to conclude, we started off looking at this quote, and there's these 3 big ideas: mind being the basis of experience, mental states being of 2 kinds, happiness being the product of a pure mind. So it's quite radical, it's quite challenging. Our happiness is not dependent on our social status. It's not dependent on our job. It's not dependent on our car. It's not dependent on the clothes we wear. It's not dependent on any external thing. It's dependent on our mind. And we have the capacity to work with our mind. And the degree to which we cultivate awareness will be the degree to which we're able to work with our mind, and the degree to which we're able to work with our mind will mean the degree to which we're happy. So it's that simple. Well, he says it's that simple. It sounds simple. Obviously, that is a lifetime's work. But I really love the sort of simple, comprehensive message of this teaching. It's fantastic. Just setting it out like that and saying, that is the kind of the good news, basically, is that we're responsible for our mental states, and we cultivate awareness. We can work with our mind, and we need to cultivate awareness in order to do that. And awareness is the key to that. So that's why we teach meditation here. That's why we're always talking about going on retreat, as a way of cultivating positive mental states. If the Buddha had sort of gained enlightenment and said, great, well, I'm now enlightened, isn't that brilliant? It wouldn't have been particularly great, would it? It's not great for us. But what he's saying is, I've had this experience, and there are things that I did in order to get there. And I'm telling you how you can follow in my footsteps. And as you follow in my footsteps, you'll experience greater happiness, more expansiveness, more and more positive mental states, basically. And that's why we're encouraging you to do things like take up the meditation challenge. That's why we meditate here. That's why we encourage you to go on retreat. But don't just take my word for it, and don't take the Buddha's word for it, and don't take Subhuti's word for it. The beauty of these teachings is that you need to try them out for yourself. And I'm not saying that in terms of like just you taking it provisionally. You have to experience it for yourself, because it's only by exploring this for yourself and working with this in your own mind. Nobody else can do it for you. You do this with your own mind, and then when you find, see what you find. And if you find that your experience matches up with what we teach here and what I've been talking about this evening, then that has an effect of changing you, basically. The matching up of the theory with your actual experience has a transformative effect on you. And that's what we're trying to support each other to do. So Subhuti gives us a really kind of basic introduction to that in this chapter. And we'll be unpacking this a lot more in over the next few weeks. And I think Pragmatic is teaching next week. So, so good to see you all this evening. Take care of yourselves, and see you next week.